Hi, everyone. I'm Rena Nine, thank you for joining us. We are following a tragedy in Pittsburgh this morning. At least 8 people have been killed after a gunman opened fire at the Tree of Life synagogue in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. This happened on Saturday morning. Typically, it is the busiest time of the week for any synagogue. Several others have also been wounded in the attack, including at least 3 police officers who engaged in a shootout with the suspect before taking him into custody. Our Pittsburgh station reports those were killed were actually in the basement of the building and also in the main floor as well. Here's what police had to say just a short time ago.
The suspect in the shooting is in custody. We have multiple casualties inside the synagogue. We have 3 officers who have been shot. And at this time, we have no more information because we are still clearing the building and trying to figure out if the situation is safe, if there are any more threats inside the building. So that's all we have at this point, but the shooter is in custody. We have multiple casualties and 3 officers shot.
Joining me now, Paul Viollis. He's a CBS News law enforcement and security analyst. Paul, the situation seems to have been contained relatively quickly. What is the protocol for a situation like this and this kind of an incident, particularly with a synagogue?
Well, Rena, you mentioned the correct word, and it's containment. The Pittsburgh Police Department.
Paul, unfortunately, you're breaking up. Is there a way that you could stand in one area, Paul? Unfortunately, the line is breaking up.
Can you hear me now, Rena?
Yeah, it's perfect. Great.
Okay, great. You mentioned the correct word. The word is containment, and that's exactly what Pittsburgh PD had to do. That's why they're still clearing buildings. They believe they had one shooter and only one shooter, but they're going to continue to clear buildings to ensure that there was nobody else. That's what they're doing right now, is complete containment.
When the suspect surrenders, which is what police, we believe, happened here, what tactics do you have to take to get someone like this, who, our understanding all morning, he was located on the 3rd floor of this synagogue, communicating with SWAT? We believe he was injured. What happens in that type of situation?
Well, the very first thing that happens is SWAT team has to locate the shooter, which of course they did, and they did so real quickly. But the most important part is isolating the shooter, making sure that he can't or she can't hurt anyone else. Once they close him in, they have to shut off all exits. This person has to feel there's absolutely no way out, and that's exactly what they did, and they did it real quickly. At that point, now they have leverage and they have a bargaining chip in order to get him to surrender, which is exactly what happened.
Paul, I know there are so many people who attend places of worship, synagogues, churches. Particularly if you are a parishioner who attends a synagogue. We know NYPD has already upped security at synagogues throughout New York City. What should folks be concerned about, particularly as they worry as they enter a place of worship?
You know, Rena, that's such a really important question, especially now. Hate crimes are up about 12%, and we know over the last 4 years they continue to rise. But as specifically as it relates to anti-Semitism, Jews are, over a study the FBI just recently did, Jews account for over 54% of the targets of a hate crime. So, you know, the probability of risk here with hate crimes in the United States has risen dramatically. And your question is poignant, to say the very least. When we start asking ourselves, what do we need to do in order to protect ourselves when we go to a house of worship? That's a frightening question, even though it's one that people keep asking. And it's something that, whether it be a synagogue, a mosque, a church, whatever it may be, it's something that these religious leaders are grappling with right now. I know I work with quite a few of them on a variety of different fronts about security, a balance of security, and providing peace of mind and safety at the same time.
You talk about peace of mind and safety at the same time. You know, we heard from one of the former president of this particular synagogue, the Tree of Life, who had said that they had actually taken precautions. They have a former FBI agent, 20-year veteran, who was giving guidance for all these 4 various synagogues throughout this area. When people employ that sort of thing, we believe that they could have even undergone active shooter training. What do synagogues need to know to be alert in that type of situation?
Well, we would have to know more about this particular situation. And clearly, when you hire someone with that kind of credential, you know that you're going to get really top-shelf counsel. But that still doesn't stop someone, as it appears this individual barges in and starts screaming, you know, all Jews must die, and he's heavily armed. I mean, that's not going to stop that, unless, of course, and Rena, you know, you and I have talked about this before, unless, of course, we go to access control at the front door of all houses of worship and metal detectors. And I don't know that we're going to go there. It's still something that we have to find a balance for, Rena, and we just haven't found that balance yet.
And Paul, when we hear that, we have heard that NYPD is fortifying synagogues throughout New York City to make sure parishioners are okay. In that instance, what does NYPD do to make sure they are safe?
Well, the first part of it, believe it or not, starts with intelligence gathering, and NYPD's intel unit is second to none. I mean, they're phenomenal, and that's gathering information off the internet, off the underground, the dark net, as well as other sources as to any probability of risk that may be brewing at that point in time for that house of worship. And then it's counseling them on proper physical security, proper access control, strategically placing closed-circuit television cameras, incorporating artificial intelligence software so that if there are people that need to be kept out or be aware of, they can do so preemptively, just to name a few. And then working with them on active shooter training and then expeditious evacuation drills that are non-fire related. All of those things are what we see police departments working with the houses of worship on.
Based on what we know at this point, which are just reports from our station, our Pittsburgh station, KDKA, we have heard throughout the morning that this was a white male, potentially with a beard, possibly in his 40s at this point, coming from our station there in Pittsburgh. And also shouting out anti-Semitic remarks as he was shooting indiscriminately into the synagogue. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that it pretty much goes right along the lines of the quintessential profile that fits someone that perpetrates acts of violence such as this, from the age to the race to the gender. We'll probably find out a lot more about him as we move along, bearing in mind, Rena, what we know at this point, look at the custody police are going to need securing search warrants for the home, vehicle, devices such as laptop and phones to see if he worked with anybody, how he planned it, and who he's affiliated with. All of that's going to be happening right now.
At this hour, police are assessing if that synagogue is safe to go back into. We know there was a bris ceremony, a circumcision ceremony for an infant that was expected to take place. 9:45, the services, Shabbat services, were expected to be held. We believe the shooter entered. Early accounts are roughly 9:30 this morning. When we talk about protecting a synagogue like this and this type of a situation, Paul, what is priority number one if you find yourself in something like this?
Is if you're actually there, and this is something that's so important for us to keep our arms around and for our viewers to understand. Active shooters is something that we contend with quite a bit, whether we be at a house of worship or we're in a mall or whatever the case may be. The first step is to try to find a location where you're safe at, where you can at least find cover, not just concealment meaning something to stand behind, but cover, something that will protect you from any kind of line of fire. Turn your cell phone to silent. Make sure that you can't be detected. These are the first two things. Try to find an exit. Third or fourth is if you can evacuate safely, you can ascertain that there's a clear path to evacuate, then take that evacuation route. If it's not clear and safe, then close yourself in and stay there and see it all clear from police.
Fascinating to hear you say make sure you seek some sort of shelter and then also to turn your cell phones off.
Yes, well, turn them on silent at least, because the last thing, and I've worked cases like this, Rena, the last thing we want is for somebody to shelter in place, keep their cell phone on, the shooter's still active, and their phone rings.
Yeah.
So that's it. It's very, very important.
Very, very important to silence your phone. I want to